A well-connected expansion insider has this: the landing spots of the ACC schools in expansion. This is Locked On Big 12.
You are Locked On Big 12, your daily podcast on the Big 12 Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Tuesday, everybody. Welcome to Locked On Big 12. I'm Drake Toll from America's #1 Big 12 podcast, Locked On Big 12. Thank you for making this show your first listen every single day. And you probably make your second listen college football addiction with TJ Pittenger, who joins us on the program. TJ, let's go through the ACC landing spots that you have sourced together and where you think each of these teams will go. A couple of Big 12 mentions in there as well. In the middle segment of today's show, will the ACC and Big 12 merge, especially after Brett Yormark's comments about congruence amongst commissioners, and finally how revenue sharing kills conferences like the Big 12, especially the back half of the league. TJ, starting with ACC landing spots, you mentioned maybe the biggest one people grabbed onto was Duke being a basketball-only member of the SEC, and maybe football comes to the Big 12. A North Carolina, NC State moved to the Big 10. You've got thoughts on Virginia, Virginia Tech, and then obviously Clemson and Florida State outside of the Big 12. Give me a brief synopsis of where you see some of these top teams in the Atlantic Coast Conference going.
Yeah, so I think, and we broke it all down, like the reason why, and we won't go all the way through all of that just for sake of time. But essentially,
if you want to, go to College Football Addiction. It's right there.
Check it out. Yeah. But it essentially all kind of has to do with this Game of Thrones, this game of, House of Cards. We'll mention every, popular TV show that ever existed in a pun. But it also ultimately has to do with all of that kind of being moved and shuffled and agreements that are back alley, backdoor, whatever, happening and already having happened. Yeah. There's a lot of thought around college football realignment circles that Florida State and Clemson just cannot land in the SEC because of the way that ESPN is going to break some agreements. And Josh Pates talked about this. We talked about it off air. The way that they can unilaterally end that ACC media agreement. There's just so much talk that it gets close to the ideas and the lines of collusion if they end up in the SEC just months later. And so if you kind of start with that as your basis, that you kind of start with that as your floor, it really makes a lot of sense that Florida State and Clemson would both end up in the Big Ten. And I know there are people, academics this, academics that. Florida State is on the verge of becoming an AAU school. Brett McMurphy confirmed that AAU membership is not required for admittance into the Big Ten. So I know we'll get that comment, and I'll be fighting with people down below about it. But before we even get the comment, it doesn't matter. You can move past that. You can stop thinking in 2000s terms of what admittance to the Big Ten meant. Where would that leave other schools? If Clemson and Florida State are in the Big Ten, the SEC is going to want some powers. They're going to want some pretty big name recognitions. They're going to want new territories. That kind of gets you to the UNC Virginia argument. You probably get them landing in the SEC, which makes a lot of sense. It gets them some premier programs, some new real estate, Virginia, North Carolina programs in states that they're not in right now, big for TV deals. And then the big one that you mentioned, this one's kind of the wild card. I don't think Duke is valuable enough in football to make sense for the SEC, but man, wouldn't they be interesting as a basketball-only team in the SEC, who the SEC very much does value basketball. I saw the way too early rankings out with Bama at the top of the list this week. And so they do care about basketball. Maybe they'll turn into a hoop school now that Saban's gone and the rest of college football can breathe a sigh of relief with just Kirby to deal with. Yeah. But Duke men's basketball to the SEC as a basketball only. Now, is there a chance that they just bring on the whole program? Absolutely. Is there a chance that they just count the cost and say like, hey, we'll just take the loss everywhere else? Maybe. I certainly think that's possible. And I'm not confirming you that Duke men's basketball is 100% in the SEC and there's no way anything else happens. But that's been whispered to me. It's been a rumor that's been tossed around. And, don't tell me, again, in the comments that this is just too crazy. There's no chance that this can happen. Because 5 years ago, you wouldn't have thought any of this stuff was going down. So those are some of the high ones. And like you said, the Duke men's basketball is certainly one that caught a lot of people off guard.
Yeah, if I told you 5 years ago that Duke basketball was in the SEC or that USC and Rutgers were playing a conference game in November, I think the Duke basketball one would have felt more realistic than the one that's actually come to fruition as of 2024. TJ, along with that, it's the conversation of Virginia Tech and NC State and how the legislation in both Virginia and North Carolina has at least explored the idea of putting state schools together, public universities together, and almost forcing them to hold hands through this process. To me, that's going to discount what Virginia and NC and North Carolina are able to do if they've got that weight holding them down. Do you think there is a way that the state government gets involved to a point that it cancels out the best opportunity for those two schools?
I don't think it would end up ruining it. Like, I don't think they could end up holding them back in such a way that those two schools don't land in the Power Two. Maybe it has the opposite effect, and the SEC and the Big Ten say this is just the cost of doing business. Just like at this point, Rutgers and Illinois and Vanderbilt are Purdue the cost of doing business, And so I think it's going to work the other way, because eventually realignment will continue going. Like, you look at your big schools, right? Notre Dame, Clemson, Florida State, Virginia, Miami, UNC, right? Your big six-ish that exist. It's going to go past that. Like, more than just those six schools, I believe, are going to end up in the Power Two. And so when you look at that next tier of schools, is NC State that much lower or higher than anybody else, right? Like anybody that's maybe in the Big 12 now, anybody else that's in the ACC? Is Virginia Tech that much lower or higher than anyone else that still kind of exists? And so if you knew that you could lock in a North Carolina and it came at the cost of that next tier, adding a team like that as well, then I think you just kind of count the cost and say, like, well, that's fine, we'll bring them along. I think the same thing happens for Virginia and Virginia Tech. So maybe both schools end up following the schools that they are kind of linked with, partnered with. Maybe they both end up in the SEC. Maybe they split them up. Again, I think a lot of this is being determined by the networks, the powers that be behind the scenes. And I think that's essentially what it is. They're dealing their cards right now and saying, hey, this makes the most sense for y'all. This makes the most sense for us. We can't take this school, but you can't take this one. Well, let's just make this happen pretty seamlessly.
Yeah, the money is going to determine this more so than any legislature, in my opinion. The money is going to 100%. Determine where these schools go. TJ, before we get into the possibility of a merger, what's the outlook for the Big 12 then? We haven't mentioned a lot about Louisville or a Pitt. What are the opportunities for Brett Yormark, who wants to expand now based on the look-in clause, for him to actually do that?
I think they're good. And we've mentioned Miami in the past. We've mentioned Louisville, Pittsburgh. I think Louisville and Pittsburgh, and even Miami to a degree, though I still feel like they fit more of the Big Two mold. I think some of those schools feel like Big 12 schools. I mean, I think NC State and Virginia Tech feel like Big 12 schools. That's just kind of their investment level. That's kind of the level that they play at. Shoot, I mean, SMU, who just landed in the ACC, actually isn't even there for another 2 months. They kind of feel like they'd fit pretty well in the Big 12. And so, I think that there are going to be opportunities. I don't, we'll get into the merger in just a moment, but I think that there will be opportunities in some of those schools like the Louisvilles, like the Pittsburghs, maybe the NC States if they don't end up in the Power Two, maybe the Virginia Techs if they don't end up in the Power Two, maybe Miami if that's something that Yormark can grab. I think there will be an opportunity for the Big 12 to continue to add pretty premier programs. I mean, like not the absolute elite of the elite, but still really, really good football programs.
Big 12 ACC merger. That's coming up next on Locked On Big 12, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. And boy, I've never been more excited to know English and to tell you about FanDuel than I am today because of Mystic Dan, baby. This weekend I went and I said, there's this guy and this horse and that horse. I'm going to bet on 4 different horses. 3 of them were contenders. One of them was named Mystic Dan. And I thought, what a cool name. So I put $20 on it and Mystic Dan paid me $300 thanks to FanDuel. It is winner take all time. Also in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 on bet spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. Mystic Dan crossing the finish line, winning the Kentucky Derby, putting money in my pocket. Thank you to FanDuel. FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. TJ, I'll put it very simple. The Big 12 and the ACC, the possibility of a merger. Now that Brett Yormark's talked about congruence amongst commissioners, is it on the table?
I mean, I suppose it's on the table. I just don't.
Bad answer. No. Take it off the table.
But I don't think it makes sense. Is it being considered? Probably. I think for Yormark to agree to it, you'd have to boot a couple of teams out of the ACC. Yeah. You'd have to say there's some dead weight here, and we can't take that on. A merger that excludes Syracuse and Boston College and Wake Forest, maybe even Georgia, maybe Georgia Tech. I don't know. Maybe they'd be kind of fringe. You get the Atlanta market.
I feel like Atlanta.
Yeah. But I don't know how much weight they really carry in that Atlanta market. I think that has more FSU and Bama and Auburn fans than anything else. So, all that said, I maybe, but it shouldn't be. There's no way it should be. Not as our conferences stand today. Yeah. Right. Taking on Cal and SMU. I mean, I just don't, those to me are just bad. If the Big Ten got a chance to redo itself right now, would they have Rutgers in it? Would they have Maryland there? Would they really? Would Illinois be? I mean, again, some of these are, but I don't know. So all that said, I don't think it should be. Hopefully, Yormark's just kind of playing nice and saying nice things, because there's no way that they should truly merge with what's going to be left over of the ACC.
That is the most important part of the conversation to me, is leverage that Yormark has over Jim Phillips and the ACC. If you look at the numbers the way they are right now with the College Football Playoff Committee, the ACC gets a bigger percentage than the Big 12 when compared to the SEC and the Big 10. However, that's with Clemson and Florida State in the fold. The second those two teams are gone, and they intend to be, the ACC falls drastically behind the Big 12. And already the TV contract with ESPN that's likely up in 2027, if not sooner, is one that really hurts a Miami or a North Carolina that wants to make money. Those schools are already looking at contingency plans on the way out, and the Big 12, therefore, will be putting itself in a worse position by merging with the ACC. Do you believe then, TJ, and I know that you're an ACC country and cover it very closely, that there's a way forward for the conference to stay alive? Because if there's not a merger with the Big 12, and we've already mentioned how North Carolina, that the power brands aren't going to stick around and make less money, how do you even keep this thing alive?
I don't know. Obviously that's Jim Phillips's big issue too, and the question that he has to try and answer. I mean, I guess you just try and you essentially become a Group of 5 conference, right? Yeah. Like you pull up a USF, you pull up some other programs that you go get Washington State and Oregon State, right? And you just pull in a few more programs to try and make and keep a conference up alive, keep them going. But yeah, I don't think that they're going to be relevant, at least on that national stage anymore. You can maybe focus on basketball, but there's a good chance. We just mentioned there's a good chance you lose Duke. You're certainly going to lose North Carolina, and then Clemson and Florida State, not elite basketball programs, but you lose them. You lose Virginia. Like, what's left, right? Wake, Georgia Tech. So I don't even know that you're a basketball conference at that point anymore, without certainly your two big blue bloods. So yeah, what do they do to keep it alive? I mean, like I said, it's Game of Thrones. You cut off. I mean, the best answer: you cut off some of the dead weight. You merge with what's remaining. Your Louisville, Pitt. You take a merger about that is Louisville and Pitt, and bring in Georgia Tech and see if you can do it with Miami still in the fold. See if you can do it with some of these other programs still in the fold, and you merge like that. Because again, I don't think you can do it any other way.
Going Big 12, so kind of the same question, but for the Big 12. You talk about, can the ACC stay alive? The answer is probably no. Can the Big 12 stay alive? They've done it once without Texas and Oklahoma, and it seems as though they're on the path to at least being there in the top 3 conversation, though a pretty big gap between the top 2 and the Big 12. With that, and Brett Yormark's comments last week saying that all this conflict is overblown. He's good friends with the other commissioners. Do you think the Big 12 is in a good spot, or is that just the Locked On Big 12 host hoping for the best?
I think they're in an okay spot. I think they're, in a good enough spot for now. In 5 years, it's tough to predict what that future looks like. And,
I'll be rich. I'll have a mansion and a boat. So
how good truly is that relationship in 5 years? Like, have they bastardized the Big 12 too, or have we moved to some kind of a super league? Right. And I was talking with somebody the other day about it. Just can you really need to be in that top 60 teams, right? And so you look at the big three right now of the, take Florida State and Clemson out of the ACC, and you think about where the SEC and where the Big 10 and where the Big 12 will be. Well, that kind of creates your upper 60, right? And then you're going to have your bottom 60, which is what's left over of the ACC, all your group of 5 stuff right now. And so as long as the Big 12 can kind of stay in that upper half, that top 60, I think they'll be fine. I also think the fact that the Big 12 is still going to be very entertaining football. They're still very passionate fan bases. It's going to be the most competitive conference in college football this year, and then maybe going forward too, with truly, truly good, even parity that makes it pretty appealing. And I think they'll continue to get their TV deals renewed through ESPN. So that will help, right? Because TV and money dictate everything.
Right.
But in 5 years from now, are they in a great spot? I don't know. I don't have a great answer on that. But I do think as long as they can kind of tread water, stay in that upper six, keep all their teams around that, top 60-ish number, they should be fine. I think the fact that the Big 10 and the SEC are going to kind of take over and be that Big 2, you're going to have another program, another conference that you're kind of working with. And I think the Big 12 kind of satisfies that.
TJ, before we go into revenue sharing, I was going to go there right now, but I want to camp with that name, Brett Yormark. Is he the guy for the job? Can he get this done?
Yeah, I think he's innovative enough. And this is not a job that many people could handle, right? Mm-hmm. Like you kind of know your place, and you have to kind of continue to campaign and politic and say all the right things,
which he's very good at.
Yeah. But he's done a good job of being creative, having the foresight, going out and getting teams, going out and making things happen when things looked dire at one point, and basically saved the Big 12 with some moves that he made after Texas and Oklahoma left. Certainly had more foresight than Jim Phillips did. Yeah. With the ACC. And so, no, I think he has done a really good job. It's kind of I wouldn't call it an impossible task. Like Jim Phillips has an impossible task over there in North Carolina. But I think he's done a really good job with the hand that he's been dealt. He's kind of turned, a pretty rough situation into something that's at least tenable for right now. Like we're talking about if it doesn't work, like in 5 years, like he's bought them 5 years of millions and millions of dollars of revenue coming in. Worst case, right? This fails in 5 or 10 years. He's made them hundreds of millions of dollars and staved off that failing for half a decade, maybe longer. So, yeah, I think that when all things considered, almost an impossible situation, he's done a really good job.
And this was the first conference to lose big in this round of expansion, with Texas and Oklahoma leaving, and the end of Bob Bowlesby into Brett Yormark has kept things alive. And the Big 12 is much stronger than the ACC, which is shocking based on what we knew 3 years ago. Coming up, bad news for everybody in the Big 12 and the ACC, really, revenue sharing. This is Locked On Big 12, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am competitive. Today's show is brought to you by Monopoly Go, a game that I don't lose. Look, Monopoly Go is the place where you go if you feel like you're not going to lose. You'll probably lose to me, but you might beat your friends. You want to beat your friends? Just a little flag on the play. You go to Monopoly Go, and you take their vaults, you smash their buildings, you heist their jazz. There's also cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with. You remember old Monopoly? You still play it, right? I still play it, but I can do it on the go on my phone, like when I'm in my car, not driving, though. Unique stickers you can trade with friends to compete for albums for big prizes as well. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton included on unique mini games like digging for treasures or robot pachinko machines. There's also new timed events to help you win big, massive multipliers for everything you win or you rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover Monopoly Go. So sit off the bench, get download it for Google Play or App Store. Game on. Monopoly Go. TJ, revenue sharing in college football, the estimated number is schools paying between 18 to 22, most likely in that 20 to 22 million range on the top end to stay relevant, right? If you don't pay that to your student athletes moving forward, if this comes to pass, then you are no longer a power in college football. And thus, the back half of the Big 12, like, sorry, Cincinnati, right? The back half of the ACC, sorry, Wake Forest and Syracuse. Maybe it's better we focus our attention less on expansion and more on just this in general and how it kills what we know about college football. What do you make of this revenue sharing model that could come about within the next couple of years?
Do you want the positive silver lining? Is that what you want here? Because I'll give it to you.
That's good.
I don't think it's that huge of a deal.
Good.
I don't. They're going to make less money. They're going to attract lower level recruits. And college football is going to go on like it always has. When was the last time Wake Forest beat out Alabama or Georgia for a recruit anyway? Like, they're still going to recruit about the same levels they always have. Now, could there be minor influx? Could there be minor changes? Absolutely. But Vandy doesn't invest in their football program right now anyway with the money that they're getting in, right? Like, some of these teams don't invest. Like, they're getting SEC money and they've never invested back into their football program. But go look at their baseball facilities and go look at their hoops facilities and go so I don't think that it's that big of a deal. Now, maybe Wake Forest loses a few more battles out to Vandy, but I don't think it how many of the Big 12 teams right now that are in the Big 12 are winning battles against the upper echelon of college football and recruiting anyway? In any scenario. So I think it just kind of...
TJ, I want to pause you right there. Joe Blow just ran into the comments and is screaming about the Big 12 got 1 5-star to the high school ranks to Texas Tech. But that's it. That's only one, right? The rest of the recruiting battles were lost. It's not a good percentage.
And they may still get that one guy because you still have as much money as you want to give to that one player. You certainly can, but you've got to moneyball it. You've got to be a little bit smarter. There's a reason the Tampa Bay Rays, who moneyball it every single year here in my backyard, don't go out and sign a $400 million contract with anybody, because that'd basically be their entire budget. Yeah. But you can kind of moneyball it down and go out and get really good players to compete kind of at your level. I don't think anybody is expecting teams in the Big 12, no offense to the Big 12, to go out and consistently compete for national championships. Like, that's just not the level of play that's going to happen. Now, can a Big 12 team win a national championship? Absolutely. Can a team in the ACC go and win a national championship? Absolutely. Is it a little easier for Florida State or Clemson, maybe Miami, some of those caked in, baked in things? Absolutely. But there's no reason that you can't build up your roster the right way, use the portal, and moneyball your way to having a chance every few years. Now, is it incredibly difficult? Yes. But has it always been incredibly difficult for Wake Forest? Like, Wake Forest is not like in a worse position today than they were 5 years ago. Kansas is not in a worse position today than they were 5 years ago. They're going to recruit about like they always have. The upper echelon of college football is going to continue to be that, and the mid-tier teams are going to continue to be mid-tier, and the lower-tier teams are going to continue to be lower-tier. It's not like all of a sudden Alabama can now buy 150 players. Like, scholarship limits still exist, and there's still the same number of recruits. And so I think it all just kind of works out the way that it was before. I don't think it'll kill them. There's my ultra positive spin.
Yeah. Is there some attrition that comes with this? You mentioned Vanderbilt there too. How, like, can we finally put the Purdues and the Vanderbilts away, and then looking at the top of the Big 12, like a Utah or a Kansas State or even a TCU, who have the money to pay that $22 million, can they now insert themselves into the upper tier, and the back half, again, like a Purdue, they just kind of go away, wither away?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Like, I think it'll largely continue on. And I also think in 4 or 5 years, when we maybe get to some kind of semblance of a super conference, maybe some kind of a super league that includes the Big 10, SEC, and Big 12, maybe merging together, I think it mostly gets ironed out then. Because I still think you're going to have all this NIL craziness and transfer portal craziness and everything else that we've got right now. It's still going to be wild. Like, it's still going to be crazy with all the stuff that comes out. And so hopefully we get to a point, and I know that Joe Blow in the comments is going to go nuts over this too. Hopefully we just get to a point where we're paying these kids the same thing, right? We're paying them as employees. We're paying them as contracts. Like, we just kind of like stop all of this insanity that's going on. And I think that also helps level everything out too. Yep.
And by the way, if you are Joe Blow in the comments, which I have probably been before in my life, though now as the more I research, the more I see, hey, wait a second, Auburn's been paying guys for decades. Now that we can all do it legally, we're maybe evening the playing field even more than it used to be when the bagmen in the SEC were even more efficient than anybody else in the country. With this, when it becomes legal, now we put it all out on the table and say, look, bring your big guns. If you've got a JB Hunt in your back pocket, like Arkansas did to bring in John Calipari, now you can flex that as a school in Arkansas who was not a top half brand in the SEC. But the money allows them to be on the forefront of that. TJ Pittenger, Locked On. This is Locked On Big 12, your college football addiction. Where can folks find more of your work?
Yeah, College Football Addiction right here on YouTube. If you're listening audio only, just College Football Addiction, really easy to find, all exclusively on YouTube. We're not anywhere else. Don't have a Twitter, don't have a Facebook for you to go find or a podcast or anything. It's all on YouTube, College Football Addiction.
That's CJ Pittenger. This is Drake Toll. Hey, thanks for following along today with expansion news across the Big 12, ACC, and all of college football. Come back tomorrow when we talk even more of that, as well as the transfer portal and this big revenue sharing thing. This has been and always will be Locked On. Thanks for making it your first listen every single day. Dose Grande.